The old, weathered farmhouse stood as a hollow shell of memories, its silent halls echoing with the agonizing absence of Clara's warm, radiant laughter. Elias sat alone in his worn armchair, the ticking of the grandfather clock amplifying the crushing weight of isolation, pressing against his fragile chest. Dust motes danced in the pale afternoon light that filtered through the kitchen window, highlighting the untouched teacup resting permanently on the counter. He gripped his rustic wooden cane with trembling hands, his sorrowful eyes staring blankly out at the vast, rolling countryside he once shared with her. The vibrant autumn leaves falling gracefully onto the wraparound porch felt like a mocking celebration of life to a man whose world had stopped turning. Desperation finally pushed Elias from his paralyzing grief, guiding his slow, heavy footsteps toward a local animal shelter filled with forgotten souls needing rescue. Rows of cold metal cages echoed with lonely whimpers, but one quiet enclosure near the very back corner drew his weary gaze almost magnetically. There sat Bo, a majestic adult golden retriever with rich honey gold fur, looking up with deeply empathetic, intelligent brown eyes that mirrored Elias's profound sorrow. Elias knelt stiffly onto the cold concrete floor, extending a trembling, calloused hand toward the wire mesh, separating two broken hearts yearning for connection. The dog hesitated for only a fleeting moment before pressing his wet nose gently against the old man's palm, exhaling a long, comforting breath. At that tender touch, the impenetrable wall of ice surrounding Elias's grieving heart cracked slightly, letting a tiny sliver of hopeful warmth seep inside. Walking out of the dim shelter into the crisp autumn air, Elias grasped the leash tightly, feeling an unfamiliar spark of purpose ignite within him. Back at the quiet farmhouse, Bo explored the empty rooms with gentle curiosity, his soft paws making barely a whisper on the worn wooden floorboards. That first night, the golden retriever curled his warm, heavy body directly against Elias's boots, resting his fluffy chin protectively over the man's feet. The rhythmic, soothing sound of Bo's deep breathing filled the agonizing silence of the dark bedroom, offering a comforting lullaby to a sleepless widower. Morning broke with soft, golden light as Bo delivered a gentle, persistent nudge to Elias's limp hand, silently demanding the start of a new day. Elias opened his tired eyes to find a soulful, golden face staring back at him, offering an unconditional love that required no complicated words. For the first time in countless agonizing months, the corners of the old man's mouth twitched upward into a fragile, barely perceptible, hesitant smile. They stepped out onto the weathered wooden porch together, the crisp morning wind rustling Bo's thick coat as they surveyed their shared, peaceful domain. In the golden retriever's profound gaze, Elias finally found the silent permission he desperately needed to keep living, breathing, and remembering without entirely drowning. Seasons bled into one another, transforming the vibrant autumn leaves into the quiet, dormant snows of winter, mirroring the unbreakable rhythm of their growing bond. Bo became Elias's shadow, matching the old man's slow, deliberate pace through the golden woods, always pausing when the wooden cane grew too heavy. In the evenings, they would sit on the weathered porch, Elias gently brushing the thick honey gold fur while sharing quiet, whispered stories of his beloved Clara. But time, in its relentless march, began to steal the newly found color from Elias's weathered cheeks, replacing it with a pale, fragile exhaustion. The long walks through the vibrant autumn forest grew painfully short, the old man's heavy boots dragging against the earth as his breathing turned shallow and ragged. Bo sensed the shifting shadows in the farmhouse, his golden ears dropping as he watched his beloved friend struggle to rise from the worn armchair. Soon, the rustic bedroom became their entire world. The soft, ethereal light from the window casting long, melancholic shadows across Elias's pale, sunken face. The faithful golden retriever refused to leave the bedside, his soulful brown eyes filled with an agonizing, human-like understanding of the impending, unavoidable sorrow. He would rest his heavy chin gently on the edge of the mattress, offering a steady, rhythmic breathing that served as Elias's only remaining comfort. When a violent, rattling cough shook Elias's frail frame, Bo would instantly press his warm body against the man's chest, trying to absorb the pain. Elias lay perfectly still beneath the heavy quilt, his trembling, calloused fingers weakly tangled in Bo's soft fur, terrified of the rapidly approaching darkness. Through the dusty window pane, the small wooden bird feeder swung empty in the cold wind, a silent testament to a world slowly grinding to a halt. A crushing, palpable silence descended upon the dimly lit room, broken only by the ticking grandfather clock, counting down the final, precious heartbeats. Elias turned his weary head, his sorrowful eyes meeting Bo's desperate gaze, and forced a final, heartbreakingly tender smile of profound gratitude. With the last ounce of his fading strength, the old man whispered a raspy, silent thank you, his hand going completely limp against the golden fur. Bo let out a low, vibrating whimper that shattered the stillness, frantically nuzzling Elias's cold cheek in a desperate plea for him to wake up. The dog's wet nose pushed against the lifeless hand, his intelligent eyes wide with a terrifying realization that his lifeline had finally slipped away. A heavy, agonizing grief filled the rustic bedroom as Bo curled his body tightly against Elias's chest, refusing to abandon his best friend to the dark. He licked the tear-stained, weathered cheek one last time, an unspoken promise of eternal loyalty echoing in the deafening, tragic silence of the farmhouse. The pale afternoon light slowly faded into a cold, suffocating dusk, leaving the loyal golden retriever sitting a silent, heartbreaking vigil over the empty shell. The cold earth of the rural cemetery welcomed Elias to his final rest, beneath a canopy of ancient oaks shedding their last vivid autumn leaves. A small gathering of townspeople stood in solemn silence, but it was the solitary, heartbroken figure of a golden retriever that truly anchored the devastating scene. Bo sat perfectly motionless before the freshly turned dirt, his rich honey gold fur stark against the gray, weathered headstones and the damp, vibrant green grass. When the quiet crowd slowly dispersed into the chilly afternoon, the loyal dog refused to follow, anchoring himself rigidly to the cold ground beside his master. He let out a sharp, agonizing bark that echoed across the quiet, historic hillside. A desperate, impossible call to a friend buried deep beneath the earth, receiving only the silent, indifferent whistle of the wind in return. Bo began to frantically dig at the loose soil with his trembling front paws. His movements were frantic and driven by a profound, blinding grief, desperately trying to unearth the man who had pulled him from the darkness of the shelter. Exhausted and thoroughly defeated, the majestic dog finally collapsed into the shallow, muddy depression he had carved, curling his large body as close to Elias as physically possible. He closed his sorrowful brown eyes and let out a long, vibrating whine from deep within his chest, a sound of pure, unadulterated, shattered heartbreak. The beautiful white marble angel statue stood silent watch over the grieving creature, its stoic stone face seemingly weeping alongside the heartbroken canine companion. Days turned into weeks, and the good people of the town tried to care for Bo, but his loyal spirit remained tethered to the empty farmhouse and the cold grave. Eventually, an unseen gentle pull guided his slow, heavy steps away from the cemetery and toward the rugged, familiar shoreline of Echo Lake. This was their sacred sanctuary, a perfectly still, glassy body of water, reflecting the moody, cloudy autumn sky, where they had shared countless quiet, wordless sunsets. Bo walked slowly along the smooth gray stones and damp pebbles, his wet nose twitching as he desperately searched for the fading scent of Elias's denim jacket. He found a large, familiar piece of weathered driftwood they used to play with, nudging it gently with his nose before looking out over the vast, misty water. Sitting tall at the water's edge, Bo's ears suddenly perked forward, his highly intelligent eyes scanning the distant, misty pine trees, fading into the thick fog. A gentle, unseen breeze rolled across the glassy surface of the lake, rustling his fluffy chest fur and carrying an inexplicable, ghostly warmth that felt incredibly familiar. For a fleeting, magical moment, the dog's sorrowful expression transformed into one of absolute awe and recognition, as if he could hear a gravelly voice on the wind. He let out a soft, joyful whuffle, a sound he hadn't made since Elias's passing, and thumped his tail rhythmically against the cold, damp pebbles. Surrounded by the breathtaking serenity of nature, the loyal golden retriever realized that while the man was gone, his loving spirit would forever echo across the water. Finding comfort in the gentle breeze, Bo no longer hung his heavy head in defeat, but lifted it proudly toward the vast, cloudy sky. The crushing weight of his grief slowly transformed into a quiet, enduring purpose, fueled by the invisible warmth he felt beside the tranquil water. He picked up the weathered driftwood with a newfound gentleness, carrying it carefully in his jaws as a sacred relic of their shared past. The loyal golden retriever became a familiar, comforting presence in the quiet town, his honey gold fur a symbol of resilience for the grieving community. Children playing in the autumn leaves would pause to bury their small hands in his thick coat, drawing out his gentle, human-like smile. In those tender moments, Bo was passing on the unconditional love and salvation that Elias had so freely given him in the cold shelter. Yet, as the sun began its descent behind the misty pine trees, an instinctual pull always guided his paws back to the historic rural cemetery. Bo walked gracefully among the weathered gray headstones, no longer frantic or broken, but with the quiet dignity of a devoted guardian. He approached the white marble angel statue and gently placed the weathered piece of driftwood at the base of Elias's resting place. Sitting tall in the damp green grass, the dog closed his eyes, listening intently to the rustling leaves that sounded just like Elias's footsteps. A warm, golden ray of light suddenly pierced through the heavy, moody, overcast clouds, bathing the resting place in a beautiful, ethereal glow. In the quiet sanctuary of his heart, a vivid memory awakened. Elias, vibrant and healthy, standing beside a radiant Clara in her vintage dress. They were smiling under the massive, ancient oak trees, reaching out with open arms across a sun-drenched, endless meadow filled with golden grass. Bo let out a soft, contented sigh into the crisp evening air, knowing with absolute certainty that his beloved humans were patiently waiting for him. He returned to the classic white farmhouse as twilight painted the rolling countryside in deep, melancholic shades of purple and burnt orange. Curling up on the weathered wooden steps of the porch, Bo rested his fluffy chin on his paws, watching the final rays of daylight fade. The old house was no longer a hollow shell of agonizing silence, but a peaceful monument to a love that transcended the fragile boundaries of life. As the first stars emerged in the crisp night sky, the majestic dog drifted into a peaceful sleep, his chest rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Even in the quiet dark, the unbreakable, spiritual bond between the grieving widower and his rescued companion continued to echo beautifully through eternity. For true love leaves a permanent, golden mark upon the soul, ensuring that two hearts bound by such profound loyalty are never truly apart.